there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm very excited to give you a video that I do every single year, and that is recommending books by Black authors with Black characters. Now this is an annual video that I do to celebrate Black History Month in the US in February, and it's coming a bit later in February because I've had a lot of difficulty filming it this year with the terrible news that we're seeing coming out of the US. In the way that racism is happening, it's even more rife than it has been in a while, and the fact that lots of diversity initiative schemes and discussions are being pulled back and back and back. And even though that was making it a bit hard for me to come out in joy with this video, I do feel like it's very important to speak on these topics. For those of you who want to protest along with us and show your solidarity, reading books by Black authors and supporting these narratives and having these conversations nonetheless is so important. And so I'm here to give you 20 books that I really recommend by Black authors. These will be across a range of age audiences, from adult, young adult to picture book. It will be across a range of genres, from non-fiction to fiction to poetry to everything in between, and so hopefully within this video there's a little bit of something for everyone. I'll also have a link to the rest of the videos and the playlist that I've made of other recommendations over the years, so if none of these books are to your fancy, you've got plenty more to choose from. There is no excuse. I'll also have content warnings in the description box down below if that's something you may need. But without further ado, that's enough of an intro, and let's get down to 20 books I want to recommend to you. The first one I want to recommend is People Person by Candice Carty-Williams, and this is an adult literary book that's got a bit more plot than some of the literary fiction technically usually does. And in this book in particular, you are following a main character who has got this boyfriend who treats her terribly, and she is trying her best to get out of this relationship. And when she does so, things don't quite go to plan, and she ends up calling on her siblings to help her. However, there's a catch to this, because all of her siblings are half siblings. They all share the same dad, but they all have different parents, and I think there's 5 of them. And so the 5 of these siblings, even though they are a bit of a ragtag family with a lot of parental trauma that they need to work through, gather together to support their sister in this issue that she is facing. Now, I've read all of Candice Carty-Williams' books, and People Person is by far my favourite. I think it's the one with the most plot, but also it's got a sense of found family, even though all of these siblings are technically family with each other, and that has to do with the ways in which they love each other despite their different upbringings, despite the fact that their father and their relationship with their father is different for each and every single one of them. They show that sibling competitivity that is bound to happen when you get to this relationship and this family dynamic. I love how they consistently show up to each other, and also how we each get to see every single character's journey, stories, and who they are. And the end was very satisfying to me because I couldn't figure out how they were going to resolve the problem that they fall into. The next one I want to recommend you is a picture book, and that is Tyrone's Cool Crown by Salomey, Doku, and Lenny Henry. This is a really joyful picture book about a young boy who needs to get a haircut, and he's not exactly excited about it. He's not very good at facing change, and it's all about how he can and is able to face change. And I think it's something that's really important for young children to see. Change is something that happens to all of us, whether we like it or not, and helping children be more equipped for dealing with that as they grow older is very good. But also the artwork in this is just so bright and so colourful and so attractive to the eye that I think it works a lot for children, but also loads of it is about different hairstyles and what hairstyle he might choose, and so it's also a brilliant celebration of black hair. And while I have seen many picture books on black hair, it's also nice to see one with a black boy as the main character for it. So really recommend this. For the horror readers among us, I want to recommend Model Home by River Solomon, which I've talked around loads on my channel already, but I really enjoyed this. It's more of a gothic horror book, and it's about this house, a model home, which is in this gated neighborhood, and it's about the family that lives there. However, they face a lot of racism and they don't particularly enjoy it there, especially the young children. So as soon as they come of age, they all move out and escape, but the parents still live in this house. The story starts years later when they are called back to their house because their parents are found dead outside the door, and it's about what has happened to cause this. I particularly really like River Solomon's writing, and it's no different here. This feels as if Toni Morrison was writing a gothic horror novel. That is the tone of the writing style that you get here. It's quite metaphorical in terms of the haunted house, and the message at the end will leave you reeling, but I did really love it. It's very direct and well done, but also slow and sinking into you with the horrors of reality kind of creeping in around the edges. We also have a black, fat, chronically disabled main character who is gender fluid, and so I appreciated getting to see that representation handled so spectacularly as well. I'm going to move on to a young adult fantasy book for all of you YA fantasy readers out there, and that is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. This is not a new book, but if it's your first time hearing about it, this one is about a young girl who is cursed by her mother to kill the prince. However, because of the way that the prince is protected with his magical court, the only way he can be killed is if she is part of that magical court, and at the moment that she truly loves him. And that is the setup for the story, but there is actually so much more to it as well. I was so impressed when I read this book because the world building is absolutely in depth, and when you read the story you just feel like you understand and know this world incredibly well. It's one of the books with the most unique magical systems and powers that I've seen in a while, and I appreciated getting to see what everybody can do and why they're able to do it. But it also is a book that has so much like African roots in it too, and that shines through some of the fantastical elements. The plot is so good, the characterization is so good. It's another one that has quite a bit of fan family vibes to it, if you can't tell by now. That's one of my favorite tropes. And I also particularly just want to say that it's got great representation, not only for black characters but also for asexual rep as well. Switching back to our adult literary readers, I do want to recommend Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo for you, because that is just such a very good literary fiction read, and it's one that's actually set in Nigeria, so if you want to read something set in Africa, this is a good book for you to read. It follows a young woman who is with her husband and they are happily married. However, she is just not able to get pregnant, and that is when her parents suggest that he takes a second wife so that she will be able to have some children, some grandchildren. And this is really difficult for her because she feels like she's failing as a woman, and it's about what that infertility does to their relationship. So as you can imagine, this is one that draws heavily on emotions. It explores sickle cell disease and what that means for parents and for families, and a lot of this is about their romantic relationship and the tensions that evolve over there being a second wife, but also about the tensions in the larger extended family. And this one really focuses, even though it's about a couple, it really focuses on the woman and her story and her narrative, and I really appreciated that. While I was reading the book, I was absolutely sucked into their story. I couldn't help wanting to know what was going to happen next. I couldn't predict what was going to happen next, and I also got to learn quite a bit about some of the political nature that was happening in Lagos during when this book is set, so I really liked that element of this story too. Ayobami Adebayo is a very talented writer, and if she's not on your radar, then she definitely needs to be. Dipping into something for the middle grade readers, I have Me, My Dad and the End of the Rainbow by Benjamin Dean, and the delightful thing about this one is also that it is queer, so it's intersectional, and this one is about a young boy who wants to understand what it means when his dad comes out as gay, because to him suddenly a lot is changing. His parents are arguing, and though they still clearly get along, they've separated and they live in different places, and his dad has said this word gay, but he does not understand really what that means. And when he finds a slip of paper in his dad's car about a parade called Pride, he wonders if going there and sneaking his way there might be the thing to help him understand his father better. What I really love about this book is how much it is brimming and overflowing with love. You can see that the son so clearly loves his dad, you can see that the dad clearly loves his son, and that they all want to be able to understand each other so that they can keep maintaining that beautiful relationship that they have. But it's also about this child trying to understand what queerness is and what this means and what it might mean for him and how his family is changing. And it was really lovely. It's a really good one to start those conversations with the children in your life and to show that beautiful lovely representation as well. It's a beautiful depiction of pride that you get to see. It's a beautiful depiction of the friendship that the young boy has with his friends from school and how much they are supporting him on this journey and want to understand right along with him. But also I really like that even from the child's perspective, while he doesn't understand everything, you get to see how it's a bit difficult for the dad, and the dad with his friends and the dad with his wife, and what they're trying to figure out that dynamic, and in a way that's simple enough for children to understand but also for elements of complexity to be there. This book unpacks it all. If you want to read a modern classic, I have to take it back to Toni Morrison, one of the best black modern classic authors there, and I'm going to be recommending Song of Solomon. This is a literary fiction feeling book about this young boy called Milk and his friend, and what happens when they go after a particular type of treasure. I think that's the best way I can explain this plot, because it is really, really hard to pin down, but when you read it, it's like reading through silk. Toni Morrison will take you on a journey and take you into different points of view and perspective, not only Milk's, and you'll see their lives unravel, and you get to be there on that journey with them. You get to see from several people and what they've had to face to make them who they are today. And if you know black people, they will have had to face a lot to make them who they are in that time and setting. And so I was very swept away along for the journey, and I especially appreciated that she does not gloss over the stories of the woman, even though this book is focused on Milk, who is a man, and focused on Milk's friend, who is also a man. It really does take the time to sink into those female perspectives and how sidelined they are in the story because of being a black woman and what they particularly have to face. So I think this is a really good book. I find it very hard to describe, and it's one I'm eager to reread, because by the time you get to the ending, you will be moved and changed, but you will also know that there are things that you definitely did not understand and you missed that you need to go back to revisit at some point in time. For the poetry readers among us, I want to recommend The Perseverance by Raymond Antrobus. This is one of my all-time favourite poetry collections ever since I read it, and this is a poetry collection by Raymond Antrobus, who is a black, deaf, Jamaican British poet. And I tell you all of this because that is what this poetry collection is all about. He explores what it means to grow up deaf, what it meant and his experiences as someone who is in the deaf and disabled community, but also his relationship with his dad, who is Jamaican, what it means to be mixed race in Britain, and how he has had certain experiences with that and is faced with different people judging him differently because of that. All of that is distilled into this poetry collection. And if you're a poetry beginner, this is a poetry collection you can read, because Raymond Antrobus's writing style is very straightforward, very easy to understand, while still maintaining that sense of lyricism and poeticness, and that's what I really like about his poetry overall. I've read all of his poetry collections now, but The Perseverance remains my very favourite, and that is why I'm recommending that one to you. For the rom-com readers among us, and I'm saying rom-com meaning romance and comedy, I would really recommend that you read A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. Now this is a comedic setup situation, because we are following a young scientist who lives in America, and she keeps getting these emails about this prince who wants to marry her, and she keeps deleting them and sending them to spam because she believes that they are spam. But no, it's not spam. He is actually a prince, and because of her heritage, he is pursuing her, and after his emails keep getting deleted, he decides to go to the US and meet her and woo her so that she will come back and be his bride. Now, this is such a funny situation and funny setup, but the story itself also maintains that level of comedy. So don't go in there believing this is going to be the most believable story. It's a Cinderella retelling in some ways, and so it's supposed to be a bit fairy tale-esque, a bit silly, a little bit light-hearted. Don't take it too seriously and you will have a good time. Taking it back to young adult contemporary, I want to recommend Not So Pure and Simple by Lamar, Giles. Now this is one of the best young adult contemporary books I've read in a very long time, and that's because it focuses on toxic masculinity, and that's what it's about. It's from the perspective of this young boy who really fancies this girl at school, this very popular girl, and when the girl breaks up with her boyfriend, he ends up seeing her do a purity pledge at church, and after she does that purity pledge, to get on her good side, he ends up taking the purity pledge as well, when all he's actually trying to do is hook up with this girl. And this book really did a very good job of tackling toxic masculinity and toxic church culture in a way that feels very distinctive, very clear and very understandable to teenagers. Now, as a Christian myself, as you might be able to see, I am not afraid of calling out some of the elements of church that are not so great, and there is a lot around purity culture that is very toxic, and there's a lot around masculinity as well within the church setting that is very, very toxic. And I appreciated that this book managed to take the time to call it out, to talk about some problems within the church, while also showing support for queerness within Christianity, and also showing how there is good in faith and there can be good in belief as long as you are removing some of the more toxic elements surrounding it. So I appreciate the book for exploring that, but on a separate note, it also tackles the subject of sex education and puberty and falling for people for the first time and toxic masculinity behaviors that teenagers see adults perpetuating and then end up copying. And so I appreciate that while this one is focused on the teenagers and their shenanigans and what they get up to and the silliness and also some hilarious situations that they find themselves in, it's not afraid to be critical of the adults and the figures of responsibility around them that these teenagers are also taking information from and learning from and being inspired by. I just think this book was very well rounded in its themes and managed to get everything across while also building a very good story and showing amazing character development too. A Little Resurrection by Selina Nwulu is a poetry collection I really love, and I don't believe I've recommended in one of these videos before. It's been a hot minute since I've read it myself, but what I particularly remember from this poetry collection was how beautifully the sentences were strung together and how lovely the lines were worded, but also how it tackled themes of what it means to be a black woman, what it means to feel resurrected from that moment of when you go to a girl to a woman and how people perceive you differently, but also just blackness in everyday life and in everyday culture. And it was a really well-rounded poetry collection that as soon as I finished it I thought, yes, this is something that I love and this is something that I will wholeheartedly recommend. For the non-fiction readers among us, I do want to recommend All About Love by Bell Hooks. Now this is a non-fiction book where Bell Hooks discusses the topic of love in a philosophical sense, and she looks at love in a friendship sense, she looks at love in a romantic sense, she looks at love in a sense of the love that we feel for the items that we buy and consumerism. And I appreciated that her love of environment was also involved, that she really looked at love from every single angle and gave chapters and time to exploring and dissecting and looking at those in avid different ways. There were certain things that I took from this, especially what it means to be a parent and how to show that love in a way that's healing and happy and beautiful, but also the chapter on love and consumerism really affected me and was one that will stay with me for quite a long time because I think she has good things to say on that. So that's why I'm recommending it, because I think those depictions of love are really healthy and good things to have. And if anything, think about love in a bit more detail is a very good thing for all of us to do. So that's why I'm recommending this non-fiction book. In terms of queer literary fiction with trans rep in it, I wanted to recommend Trumpet by Jackie K. I think it's really important, as I said at the beginning of this video, for us to be reading books by voices and people who are being squashed out at the moment, particularly in the US, as this is US Black History Month I'm celebrating, and trans voices are a very important part of that, especially people of colour trans voices. So while this is not an own voices book for trans rep, I do still recommend Trumpet by Jackie K. And this is about a trumpet player who's really famous and he dies, and after he dies it comes out that he's actually trans, and the only person who knew this was his wife, not their son, no one else, not the rest of the jazz band, only the wife. And it's about what unfolds after that, how she copes with her grief and being in the spotlight, and so many discussions happening about her husband's body. And also it goes into different perspectives, such as the perspective of the son who's feeling really betrayed by not having known this while growing up under their roof the whole time. It goes into the perspective of the bandmates. It goes into the perspective of the person who does the discovering as they look at the body and do all the filing that they need to do. It goes into so many different perspectives, but ultimately the message is one about grief. It's about loss. It's about what you do when you're trying to move on. It's about whether you need to, and it's got a beautiful love story as it reflects on their relationship and how they got to be the way that they are. And so I really recommend this book. It was really lovely, and it was one of those ones that sat with me for a long time, and I think it still really will. For those who read novels in verse, I recommend All the Fighting Parts by Hannah V. Sawyerr. Now this is a novel in verse that's young adult, and it's about a young teenager who is sexually assaulted by the pastor of her church and how that affects her voice. It's a very serious topic. It's a very serious topic, and yet it's done in a way that is palatable for young adult readers. It never shows that exact moment, which I really appreciated, and the book actually starts long before that happens, and I appreciate it because we get to see the before and after. We get to see how happy this teenager is, how she is coping with very real teenage problems, and she is with her father who is a single parent because her mother has passed away, and so you see that dynamic and you can see distinctly and clearly how her life changes after the moment of everything happening. And I think it's important to have these conversations with children, with teenagers, for safeguarding reasons, but I don't think I've read a young adult book that drove home what life is like before and what life is like afterwards in a very distinct and clear way as this novel in verse did. So yes, I recommend it. And I'm also going to recommend you another picture book. This is Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o and Vashti Harrison, and this is a beautiful book about a young child who is very dark-skinned. She's more dark-skinned than her mother, she's more dark-skinned than her sibling, and she is called names at school for being so dark-skinned, and it's about her learning to love her skin and her beauty and who she is. And I think that is just such a lovely picture book that so many young black children need in their lives, but also other children should be reading too, so they can understand the harm that calling people names is and how dark skin is also beautiful, and so they can see that and understand that from a young age too. It's a really lovely picture book. The artwork is absolutely stunning. I think there were pages of the book that I would just hang up on my wall because they looked like works of art and paintings that needed to be framed, but ultimately what speaks to me most about this book is the message. I just think it's so lovely, and it's one of those picture books I wish I had when I was younger too. Taking it back to literary fiction, because I tend to love reading black literary fiction, I've got Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. This is by the author of An American Marriage, which is also fantastic. And Silver Sparrow is about the father has got one family and another family, and one family knows about the other, but the other does not know about them. So that's kind of the dynamic that they're in. And so this book becomes a ticking time bomb as you are waiting for the families to kind of both realise that the others exist, especially when the two girls, well, inevitably kind of have their storylines overlap a little bit. I really like this. I think it shows very complex family dynamics, and sometimes you just get complex family dynamics in life, but also Tayari Jones has just such a way of writing characterization that these characters feel like they could really walk off this page and into my life, and I would fully believe it because they are fully realized. And it shows something about how complicated love can be, but also how complicated sibling love can be as well, depending on the history that the family has. Yeah, so I hesitate to say too much about this book, but it's a really good literary fiction to read. The next book I want to recommend is also young adult contemporary, and that is Nigeria Jones by Ibi Zoboi. I love Ibi Zoboi's books. She's such a fantastic writer. And Nigeria Jones tackles a really complicated subject because we're following a young teenager who is the daughter of someone who has started a new community. And this community is about erasing racism and removing racism from black people's lives, and it takes in a lot of people who are really struggling in their communities and their environments. So you'd think that this could only be a good thing. However, it's reached the point where it's starting to manifest into cult-like behaviors, and she becomes very scared of what it means to stay in this closed-off community. And so she wants to break out of it, but it's very hard to break out of a community where your father is the one who is running it and you are still underage and cannot live on your own. And so that's what this book is about. And I think sometimes when you're trying to do good, you can veer a bit too far into the extreme. And so I appreciated that this book tackled what that extreme can look like and the damage it can do to the people around you in a way that felt very clear cut, but also really showed the emotional journey that our main character has to go on to stand up for herself and to stand up for what she believes in and what she feels is right. And I think it shows teenagers that if you politically believe something to be correct, you can use your voice, you can stand up, you can make a change, and you can do something about it. And it's ultimately a story that I feel like it puts teenagers in a bit of a leadership role and show them that they can take control of their lives when they are in bad or dangerous situations, which I really appreciate this book for doing. But it's also just a book that shows teenagers messily. Like, it shows teenagers making a mess of their choices, of their education, of their love lives, and there's nothing more real to me than young adult stories that show how complicated and tangled teenage years can really be. We are down to the final 3 books here, so I want to recommend you What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri, which is one of those books that I call required reading. It's a non-fiction book about what racism means, how it impacts black people, and how it impacts you. Whether you are a black person, whether you are an Asian person, whether you are a white person, it's about how racism doesn't benefit anybody by existing. And Emma Dabiri, like, you should just go and read it. Me talking about it is not going to help here. Emma Dabiri writes everything so very clearly. There's no way to misunderstand. There's no way to misconstrue what she's trying to say. She gives you facts. She gives you facts. She talks about her own life, and she talks about definitions of words and the power of words and the ways in which society is oppressing all of us by letting racism exist. I was sincerely impressed after reading this. I highlighted so much, and annotated that book to bits while I was reading it, and I was very, very excited once I closed the book, because it was one that I just knew I wanted to get into everybody's hands, because it revolutionized the way that I view race and ethnicity, and I think it's going to revolutionize the way that a lot of people see it, but also how they relate to it, how they communicate with it in the everyday. And it also gives you, she gives you some very concrete steps of what you can do to be a better ally, what you can do to face racism around you in the everyday, whether that's on a larger scale or a smaller scale. What a fantastic resource for us to have at our fingertips if we choose to read it. Lastly, I want to recommend you 2 books which were in my best books that I read of the year in 2024. So you may have heard about these before if you were on my channel regularly, but if you're new, let me introduce you to Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks, which I really recommend as an audiobook if you're going to choose to read it, because this is a historical fiction book set in the 1980s, I think, or 1990s in Bristol in the UK, and it's about this black woman who just wants to make music. She wants to live her life and be happy in the club scene that she kind of goes into with her friends, but it's about what happens when that scene is becoming, and her neighborhood Bristol is becoming, over-policed, and how that changes her whole life, how it changes her family life, how it changes her romantic life, how it changes where she lives, how it changes how she interacts with people. But it also is a book that's full of a lot of pain and a lot of grief and a lot of female autonomy as she takes control of her own story as well. It's one that really spoke to me. It's written in patois, so you get that accent written into the dialogue and the wordings, and that's what makes the audiobook so good, because you can just hear that patois accent as you are reading the book. And also the audiobook is infused with music. There's a lot of music in this book, and so when you listen to the audiobook you hear that rap being done, like rapped to you. You get to hear the beats as well, and it brings that to life in a whole new light. A fantastic, moving and powerful book. And last but not least, the last book I want to recommend to you is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. And this is, again, an adult literary fiction book about a really old and elderly black man and his relationship. Because while he has a family, while he has a wife, he is actually gay and has been in a secret relationship with his best friend throughout the majority of his life. And it talks a lot about what it means to be someone who is an islander, who is queer, who grew up on the islands and in that environment, and then moved over to the UK and is still closeted and is still trying to hold together his family and his relationships, even though he is oppressing a key element of who he is and who he really loves. Now, Mr. Loverman is not a nice character. He's really unlikable, and when you first meet him you just wonder, what is this man doing with his life? Why is he making these choices? Why is he treating these people this way? But the more that you hear his story and the more that it unravels, you learn that the people around him are rather unlikable too, that everybody makes mistakes, but also you start to feel for him and feel sympathy, because you can see how keeping this secret his whole life, keeping part of his identity his whole life, has definitely had an effect on his choices and how he interacts with everyone around him. It's a harrowing queer story, but it's also a really, really important one, and I really, really love hearing from an elderly character. I feel like we don't get to see that too much in literature. I also really like that, again, this one is written in patois for the most part, so if you listen to the audiobook, you'll probably get to hear those patois voices. I didn't listen to it myself. And also it shows that code switching. It shows how he talks differently when he's talking to white people, and he talks differently in situations where he wants to be regarded as more educated, rather than how he talks to his brethren, how he talks to his friends and family who are part of the community. And I really like that you get to see that depiction in books for people to be able to understand that a little bit more. And there you have it. We have whizzed through 20 recommendations. I hope there was something in there for you. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Are you going to read any of these books? Have you read any of them? Or what is one book by a black author that you would really, really recommend? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!